9 money rules rich parents teach their kids that yours never did. Your parents taught you to say please and thank you. They taught you to look both ways before crossing the street. They taught you to work hard, get good grades, get a good job. What they didn't teach you, because nobody taught them either, is what to do with the money once it landed in your hands. Somewhere in a different zip code, a different tax bracket, a different kind of dinner table conversation, another kid was learning something you never got a chance to learn. Not smarter, not more talented, just handed a different manual. And that manual is the entire reason two people with identical incomes can end up decades apart in net worth. This isn't about blaming your parents. They gave you what they had. Most of them were never taught either, so the silence just got passed down, generation after generation, like a debt nobody signed for, but everybody inherited anyway. This video breaks down 9 rules that wealthy families teach almost by accident, at the dinner table, in the car, in small offhand comments that shape a kid's entire relationship with money before they're old enough to understand what's happening. If you didn't hear these growing up, you're about to hear them now. Let's get into it. Number 1, assets versus liabilities gets taught before our...
In a wealthy household, a kid learns early that not everything you buy is the same kind of purchase. A boat is not the same as a rental property. A car is not the same as a share of a business. One kind of purchase takes money out of your pocket every single month. The other kind puts money into it. Most households never make this distinction out loud. A purchase is just a purchase. You wanted it, you could afford it, you bought it. Nobody stops to ask which side of the ledger it lands on.
This single distinction changes the trajectory of an entire life. A kid who grows up hearing, "Does this pay you or does this bill you?" starts running that filter on every decision by the time they're an adult, automatically, without effort. A kid who never hears it grows up treating every purchase the same: a couch, a car, a stock, a vacation, as interchangeable expressions of, "I have money, so I can buy this." One of those framings builds a balance sheet. The other one just moves money from one place to another until there's nothing left to move. The fix is embarrassingly simple. Before any purchase over a certain amount, ask one question. Does this put money in my pocket over time, or does it take money out? A rental property, an index fund, a business you own a piece of, these pay you. A car, a boat, a closet full of clothes, these bill you, quietly, forever, in maintenance and depreciation and insurance you'll pay long after the excitement wore off. You don't need to avoid liabilities entirely. You need to know which one you're buying before you buy it. Number 2, the family never argues about money in front of the kid. They narrate it. This one surprises people. You'd think wealthy families just don't have money stress, so there's nothing to fight about. That's not it. Every family has money stress at some point. The difference is what happens with that stress in front of the children. In a lot of households, money conversations are either completely hidden, kids grow up with zero visibility into how bills work, how a mortgage works, what percentage of income goes where, or they're only visible during a crisis, a screaming match about an overdraft, a slammed door, a silence at dinner that everyone knows is about money but nobody names. In wealthier households, there's a third option most people never see modeled. The parents narrate the decision-making out loud, calmly, as it happens. "We're not doing the bigger house this year because we want the extra to go toward your college fund. We're paying off this card first because the interest is the highest." The kid isn't shielded from money and isn't traumatized by it. They're educated by it, in real time, without even realizing they're being taught. If you grew up in silence or in crisis, you have to build this narration habit for yourself as an adult, out loud, even if it's just to yourself. Say the reasoning behind your money decisions. Write it down if you have to. "I'm not buying this because I'm already funding my emergency account." That sentence, repeated enough times, becomes the internal voice that replaces the silence you inherited. Number 3, they get taught that debt has a purpose test. Most households treat debt as a single, undifferentiated bad thing, or worse, as something completely normal that everyone has and nobody questions. Wealthy families teach a purpose test instead. Before taking on any debt, the question isn't, can I afford the payment? The question is, what is this debt buying me? A mortgage on a home that appreciates and that you'd otherwise pay rent for anyway. That debt has a purpose. A loan to fund an education that meaningfully increases earning potential. That debt has a purpose. A credit card balance for a vacation you already took, a couch you already sat on, a phone you've already upgraded twice since. That debt has no purpose left. It's not funding anything anymore. It's just a fee for a decision you've already finished making. Kids who grow up hearing this distinction learn to ask it automatically. Kids who don't grow up hearing it treat all debt the same, either as something to avoid entirely out of fear, which can be just as limiting, or as something totally unremarkable, just a normal cost of living, no different from a phone bill. Neither extreme serves you. The purpose test does. Before you borrow anything, ask what it's actually funding, and whether that thing will still be worth something after the debt is gone. Number 4, they get an allowance tied to decisions, not chores. This one's subtle, but it matters more than people think. In a lot of households, an allowance, if it exists at all, is tied to chores. Clean your room, get $5. Take out the trash, get $2. This teaches a kid that money comes from labor, which is true, but it's incomplete. It doesn't teach anything about what to do with the money once it's earned. In wealthier households, the allowance often comes with almost no strings attached, but with one hard rule. You decide what to do with it, and you live with the consequences. Spend it all on candy the first day, and you have nothing for the toy you wanted next week. Nobody bails you out. Nobody advances next week's allowance early. The kid learns opportunity cost through actual lived experience, at low stakes, while the mistakes are still cheap. By the time real money enters the picture, a first paycheck, a first credit card, the decision-making muscle already exists. It's not being built for the first time under real pressure with real consequences. If you never got this training, you're getting it now, decades late, at much higher stakes. The fix is the same principle scaled up. Set a spending amount for yourself each month that's genuinely yours to allocate, no judgment, no oversight, and then force yourself to live inside it. Let yourself feel the actual weight of a decision instead of theorizing about it. That felt weight is the entire lesson, and it only sinks in through repetition. Number 5, they're taught that net worth is private and spending is the only thing anyone sees. Here's something almost nobody says out loud, and it's one of the most important distinctions on this entire list. What you see in someone's driveway, on their vacation photos, on their wrist, tells you almost nothing about what they're actually worth. It only tells you what they chose to spend. Wealthy families often teach this explicitly. The neighbor with the newer car isn't necessarily richer than you. He might just be more leveraged. The friend posting from a resort might be one missed payment away from real trouble. Spending is a performance. Net worth is a private number that nobody sees unless you tell them. Kids raised without this distinction grow up conflating the two. They assume visible spending equals actual wealth, and they calibrate their own sense of financial adequacy against a performance they're not even seeing accurately. This is exactly how lifestyle creep gets its grip. You're not actually competing against your neighbor's real financial position. You're competing against a curated highlight reel that might be entirely funded by debt. The correction here is simple to state and hard to live. Stop reading spending as information. A car tells you what someone chose to finance. It tells you nothing about their retirement account, their emergency fund, or their debt-to-income ratio. The only net worth that should influence your decisions is your own, and that number should be something you check regularly and something almost nobody else ever sees. Number 6, they learn that "I can't afford it" is banned, but "it's not a priority right now" is required. This is a language rule, and language rules shape thinking more than people give them credit for. In a lot of wealthy households, kids are taught never to say, "I can't afford that." The phrase is treated as defeatist, as closing a door permanently. Instead, they're taught to say, "That's not a priority for me right now." The distinction feels small. It isn't. "I can't afford it" describes a fixed state. It says something about your identity. You are a person without enough money. "It's not a priority right now" describes a choice, an active allocation decision that could change the moment your priorities change. One framing is passive and permanent. The other is active and temporary. A kid who grows up saying the second phrase grows into an adult who thinks in terms of trade-offs and priorities. A kid who grows up saying the first phrase, or hearing it said constantly by exhausted parents, grows into an adult who thinks in terms of limitation and scarcity, even once the actual money exists to make different choices. Try this yourself for 30 days. Every time you're about to say, "I can't afford that," replace it with, "That's not a priority for me right now," and actually finish the sentence. What is a priority instead? Say it out loud. The habit rewires how you relate to every financial decision you make going forward. Number 7, they get shown the actual math of compounding, on paper, with real numbers before they turn 18. This is maybe the most literal rule on this list, and it's also the most avoidable gap. Wealthy families often sit a kid down at some point, not necessarily with a lecture, sometimes just with a printed chart or a quick calculation on the back of a napkin, and show them concretely what money invested young actually becomes by retirement. Not in the abstract, in dollars. $200 a month starting at 20 versus $200 a month starting at 30, side by side, with the actual gap written out.
Most people never see this until they're already in their 30s, if they see it at all, and by then, the most valuable years for compounding are already gone. The information isn't complicated. It's just never delivered early enough to matter, because most parents were never shown it either. This gap alone explains a meaningful share of the wealth difference between families who talk about investing casually at the dinner table and families where the word stocks sounds like something reserved for other people. If nobody showed you this at 16, show yourself now, today, on paper with your actual numbers. Calculate what your current monthly contribution becomes in 20 and 30 years. Then calculate what it becomes if you increase it by even $50 a month. Seeing the real gap in real numbers does something that abstract advice never manages to do. It makes the decision to start now feel urgent instead of optional. Number 8, they're taught to negotiate, ask and question price as a normal, unembarrassing act. In some households, questioning a price, asking for a discount, or negotiating a bill feels almost shameful, like an admission that you can't afford full price. In wealthier households, this gets flipped entirely. Negotiating isn't a sign of a struggle, it's treated as basic financial competence, the same way checking a receipt for errors is basic competence. Kids watch parents ask for a better rate, question a fee, call a company, and calmly request a waiver, and they absorb the idea that price is often a starting point, not a fixed fact. People who never see this model grow up treating every listed price as final, every bill as non-negotiable, every fee as something you simply accept because arguing feels awkward or beneath you. That discomfort costs real money repeatedly for an entire lifetime. Every annual fee never questioned, every rate never negotiated, every bill paid at full price when a 5-minute phone call could have lowered it. The rule is simple. Once you decide the discomfort isn't a big deal before accepting any recurring bill at face value, insurance, cable, a subscription, a loan rate, ask if there's a better option, a loyalty discount, a rate match. You'll be surprised how often the answer is yes, and how little it costs you to ask. Number 9, they get taught that the goal isn't to look rich, it's to be free. This is the rule that ties every other one together, and it's the one that gets inherited least often because it runs directly against what culture rewards visibly. Wealthy families frequently teach, explicitly or through lived example, that the entire point of money isn't the appearance of wealth, it's the accumulation of options, freedom to leave a job you hate, freedom to take a lower-paying job you love, freedom to help a family member without going into debt yourself, freedom to say no to overtime without fear. That's the actual target. The car, the watch, the house, those are just costumes that people mistake for the destination. Households without this rule often default to the opposite target without ever choosing it consciously. The goal becomes looking like you've arrived rather than actually arriving. And looking like you've arrived is, almost by definition, the most expensive way to spend money because it requires constant visible upgrading to maintain the illusion, with nothing underneath it accumulating in the background. If nobody handed you this rule, hand it to yourself now. Before any major purchase, ask which target it serves. Does this move me toward freedom, or does it just move me toward looking free while quietly funding someone else's freedom instead? The banks, the dealerships, the lenders. That single question, asked consistently, will save you more money over a lifetime than almost any other habit on this list. Here's what ties all 9 of these together. None of them require a higher income. None of them require connections or luck or a head start most people don't have. Their language, their framing, their small repeated habits that get modeled early enough that they become automatic before adulthood ever tests them. If you grew up without this manual, you're not behind because you're less capable. You're behind because nobody handed you the pages. That gap closes the moment you start teaching yourself the rules you were never taught. Today, on paper, out loud, with your actual numbers, starting now. You've heard all 9. You probably recognized the ones that were missing from your own upbringing, maybe more than one, maybe all 9. That recognition is the beginning of the correction. The families who pass these rules down aren't smarter than yours. They just got lucky enough to inherit a manual first, and now you're holding it too. What you do with it from here is entirely yours to decide.